straight to the point. Zimbabwe is reputed to have the highest literacy rate, or the second highest in Africa. Along with that, we are also reputed to have highly skilled workforce, which is also highly mobile. And this afternoon, we would like to see or to find out how Zimbabwe can leverage on that advantage to ensure that the country goes on a growth trajectory. We've got a highly experienced panel this afternoon to help us unpack that. First, I've got Precious Morena. Precious Morena is the HR and Communications Director at Lafarge. She is also the current IPMZ President. She's a board member of the Marketers Association of Zimbabwe, MAZ, and she's also a CZI Council member. Education-wise, she's got a BSc in Psychology Honors, UZ, and also an MBA. Please help me welcome Precious to the podium. We've also got Victor Nkomo. Victor is the head of HR at ICAZ. In his past life, he was with Olivin Industries. He is a past president of IPMZ. When I asked him about his background, he didn't want to say much, and I realized why. He was also a past magistrate for 10 years. So maybe he thought he could have sentenced me, and maybe I remembered him and he doesn't, I don't know. His qualifications, he's got a BL and LLB from UZ and also an MBA from NAST. Please help me welcome Victor. I know that we are facing lunch hour, but we will be brief. My panelists have been briefed. They'll give brief presentations, and then we will open up for questions. My third panelist, Gladys Mpemba, I've not been able to locate her. Okay. Oh. My apologies, madam. Can you come up, please? Let's give a round of applause. I will give you her details later, but for now, I'll ask Victor to come to the podium. Victor is going to be traveling, and I'm giving him the first option to go. Over to you.
Where is the project? Where is the project? Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'm going to speak to you on two issues. The first one is talent, the acquisition of talent in this particular instance, how we acquire it and how we nurture it. And the second one is employee engagement. So I've been given 2 topics, but before I take off, I would like to show you a 30-second video, just 30 seconds. Don't worry. Yeah. So I hope, sorry, that's the wrong one. This is just 30 seconds. I hope the people at the back can see what is happening. So the moral of the story, ladies and gentlemen, is one of talent. You either have it or you don't. So you can practice all you want. I would like to see you deliver that kind of performance. Okay. Getting to the point, the mandate I have specifically is to address what we could do in order to, within our social environment, in order to encourage growth, which I think has been spoken about before. And the message simply is, we need to identify talent in Zimbabweans, we need to identify it early, and we need to build on that talent in order to achieve excellence. Right now, my view is we are probably getting the job that is available. We are probably starting those things that we think we can study, but we are not building on the natural talent that people have. So we need to sharpen our tools in terms of how we identify and how we nurture talent so we can achieve the excellence that I'm referring to. And this is talking to the nation. It's talking to individual organizations. I would like to, Jack Welch had a differentiation strategy, how he treated his people as chief executive of General Electric in the US for quite a while. And I don't know if people at the back, you can read that, but essentially this is a bell curve of sorts, and this is what he calls, the vital 70. So within our nation, there will be 70 people, 70% of our nation who have certain talents and can achieve so much. But within that nation still, there is what he calls the top 20%. And the top 20% are the people whose training has been built on the natural talent that they have. And because you've built on their natural talent, you are therefore able to achieve excellence. Of course, there will be guys who will struggle, the 10% there. So I'm hoping this will help me make my point. So what is my point? My point is, if you accept that talent is natural, that gentleman you just saw has a natural talent. It doesn't matter how you try, you will not be able to imitate him. If you accept that your talent is natural phenomena, it is a flair, it is actually a gift or your aptitude. So, like I was saying, you either have it or you don't. If you then compare that with skill, you can acquire a skill. If that skill is built on the natural talents that you have, you will be able to achieve excellence. But if not, you will be the vital 70 or the 10% that I spoke about earlier on. So, no talent, if you don't have a talent and you go acquire a skill, you are likely to give very average competence, yeah? But if you then have talent, you identify that talent, and in the training, you build on that talent, the chances are that you'll then be able to achieve excellence. And so what is it that we need to do in the social sphere? It's actually at primary school, even before primary school, we need to be focusing on what talent a person has got. That gets better as you go up to secondary school. If you break it into two, your O-levels and your A-levels, all the time, you are either confirming or demystifying the findings that you made when the child was young in terms of in what areas they are talented in. If you are able to track their competence through secondary school, it will lead them to the right choice of subjects in A level. I'll tell you how I got into A level myself. I walked into the headmaster's office, he looked at my results and told me what subjects I was going to do. But obviously, as to whether or not that's where my talents lie, I don't know. This is more important now at tertiary level. So if we are able to identify that talent early, build on it, train on it, the chances are that we will be able to discharge into commerce and industry more competent people who will be able to achieve excellence as opposed to mere average competence. So much about talent. Remember, I've got 8 minutes in which to do my presentation. The next matter I'm supposed to talk to is what we need to do in order to re-engage our human capital. And the question suggests that the capital is currently not engaged. So where is our current capital? It's on the streets. I don't know whether you can see what's happening there. The capital is on the streets. It is hustling. It is trying to make a living on the streets, the majority of them. But this last one here is actually talking to those who are in the offices and probably in employment. And you can see she's holding on to her cheek, suggesting that she's not very optimistic about her job, and she is probably disengaged. Let's talk a little bit about where the levels of engagement in our country are. Where we are saying the closer we are to 100%, the more engaged the employees are, and the further away, the less engaged they are, or the more disengaged they are. Last year, I had insights into employee engagement survey carried out by 2 organizations, one within retail and the other within medical insurance. And the engagement levels were between 61 and 65%. There was yet another that carried out an employee engagement survey last year, which is within the textile and clothing manufacturing, whose employee engagement levels are down to 38.5%. That is an industry which is in trouble, where at NEC the employees have taken a 20% salary cut, so you'd understand where they are now. So it's important that we find ways of engaging this. So I've just given you 3, which I'm aware of as an individual. But the bulk of the organizations in our country are not measuring employee engagement. So we have no idea what emotional attachment our employees have to our positions, to their positions, and to the organizations they serve. You can compare that with global trends as of 2016. I have data for 2016. I don't have 2017 yet. You see, this is a trend from 2011 to 2016. And it peaked at 65 in 2015 and started going down to 63%. So you can see how we compare with that so far as the 2 companies that I mentioned. But certainly, if you're talking about our textile industry, that's how bad things are. So the lowest scoring measures within employee engagement in the organizations that I spoke about are rewards and incentives, health and safety, recognition and growth, trust, and work-life balance. So what we need to do very quickly, we need to measure employee engagement frequently. That is very important. As we measure employee engagement, we need to honestly address those measures that score poorly, because that is what is going to raise the levels of engagement. And we need to hold focus groups to clarify whatever may not be clear in our investigation, and we need to give staff feedback, otherwise you are not able to do it on a continuous basis. And lastly, I think for credibility, it's important to use independent consultants when you do these things. So ladies and gentlemen, very briefly, that's my presentation.
Thank you very much, Victor. Let's give him another round of applause. I'll call straight away Precious Morena to give her presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone. My comments are very quick and very brief, and I'm going to comment on three things. The first one being the major human capital challenges that we have in the country today. And the second thing being how we can leverage on the human capital that we have in the country today. And then the final one being around the human capital investment models that we have in the country today that are really good and that we should reinforce and that other countries can emulate. And my task is simple, because a lot of the challenges that we have today in terms of human capital management have already been spoken about by a lot of the speakers that were here before me. So I do not need to, overstress the point. But the key challenges that we have today, first of all, there's the big issue around the cost of labor in Zimbabwe. And I think it has been said over and over and over again. But what I just want to mention is that the problem we have today is historical. It's historical in the sense that when we went to dollarization, we started with a huge base. And we went into dollarization before we went into wage reviews before we sort of came to understand the fundamentals of doing wage reviews in a dollarized economy. So the wage reviews, I remember for 2010, we were talking about 30 to 40 to 50% salary increases that we were getting at that time, which were unrelated to inflation, unrelated to any economic fundamentals. And we're now trying to correct that. It's not an easy discussion, and it's not something that's going to happen overnight, but it's definitely something that must happen. Today, we cannot compete with other countries outside of Zimbabwe because of the cost of labor. If I talk from my Lafarge experience, one of the things we do a lot across Lafarge is we compare the wages of some common jobs in all the Lafarge plants across Africa. And one thing that always stands out is that Zimbabwe is the highest in terms of manpower costs across Africa in Lafarge. And in some instances, we actually pay 3 times as much as other countries. It also goes then to the cost of the product. When you look at the cost of cement in Zimbabwe and you look at the cost of cement across all the other African countries, you also see that the cost of cement here is very high. So what we have tried to do is we've increased our wages and then increased the prices. So we have a simple solution there. Reduce the wages, reduce the prices. It sounds simple, and it is simple, but it's what goes first and what must happen first, which is a critical discussion that we need to pick up as social dialogue partners on the tripartite negotiating forum, the labor, trade unions, employers associations, etc. It's definitely a key discussion. We also need to talk about, in order to also deal with this issue, we need to talk about productivity-based pay. One of the biggest challenges we have in Zimbabwe is around our sense of entitlement. We want to be paid even when we don't work. We want to be paid even when the company is not producing. We want to be paid when we are sitting at home. But we are the same people who, when we go to London, to the UK, we work shifts and we work overnight, and we know that if I don't show up for work, I will not get paid. So for us, it's really just a big culture change around accepting that in order for this economy to move forward, we need to accept productivity-based pay. People need to be paid for output, and we need to come up with models that can support that. I think there's already a productivity center that's being established with the Ministry of Labor, and I think there's a lot of work that's being done around it in order for models to come up in this economy for us to come with productivity-based pay. The other big challenge that we have today is around the fact that we have the skills, but the skills are not experienced. So we have a huge skills to experience gap. We have the skills, but the people are not experienced. Believe it or not, we are still suffering from the effects of the brain drain of 2003 to 2009. And so we have a lot of educated youngsters who are eager to do the job, but they do not have the experience. And we need to come up with a lot of programs, mentorship, coaching programs, exchange programs, to develop those people faster than any other country would do in order to accelerate what we can gain out of them. Outside of that, we also have, a big culture issue in Zimbabwe. And I think one of the things that companies, auditing firms, etc., do a lot is they map countries in terms of the countries that have the highest level of corruption, etc. And Zimbabwe is still ranked as one of the countries with the highest level of corruption. Now, when you have a labor force that's used to getting paid for doing what they are already paid for, it affects the integrity of the country as a whole. It affects investment interest in the country, and it affects the way business is being done and the productivity. Because people are self-centered, they want to earn more from just doing their job than they actually do. But as I talk about this, one of the things I always say is that when we lament about our country and the bad things that are happening, we should look at ourselves and say, what is it that we actually have? Because for us to progress, we need to start with what we have. Whatever we have is what will springboard us to the next level. And I must tell you, we have a lot. First of all, what do we have? We have a large skills base. Someone mentioned here that we have, now we used to have one university, now we have over 15 universities in this country. So a lot of our people are educated. And we're still the country with the highest literacy rate in Africa, which means we have that as capital. And we can leverage on that. You know, in Lafarge, one of the things I always hear when I travel across the world is that in Zimbabwe, you are lucky because you can communicate in English and everybody understands. And I used to take that for granted. But it's something that makes business easier. And it's something that we should leverage on. That we have people that are educated and that can easily understand the markets and the language that is used in business today. We must also accept that we have a peaceful, warm, and very receptive people. I'm telling you, being an HR director in South Africa and being an HR director in Zimbabwe are two completely different things. The unions in this country are progressive. There's no question about that. They are not militant for the sake of being militant. And this is something we have. This is something we can leverage on as we build our economy. We have people who want to take the country to the next level. The third thing we have is we have a huge proportion of Zimbabweans working outside of Zimbabwe who have had international exposure. A lot of countries where people think their economy is good and they're happy with their economy, very few people go and look for jobs outside the country. Most of their population stays within. And it's good for them. But for us, we have that advantage of having a lot of Zimbabweans that have been exposed outside this country. And we can leverage on those skills to take the country to the next level. And we must leverage on those skills. We must start finding ways to bring those skills back into the country and to use them to take the nation to the next level. A lot of Zimbabweans are leading key businesses like Coca-Cola, Unilever, Lafarge, Total in Africa, in Middle East, and in Europe. We can leverage on all those people to take the country to the next level. The other thing is that even though you don't see it every day, Zimbabweans are very agile and creative when they are faced with that adversity. When things are normal, we're okay, nothing happens. But when we are faced with adversity, we are very creative and very agile as a people. I don't think economists ever predicted that this economy would still be running up to this stage with how far we've come. But we have been creative all the way, every day, to the extent that we can buy vegetables using plastic money, and we don't see anything wrong with that, and life goes on. That creativity can be used as a key advantage to take the country to the next level. It's a skill that our people have, and we need to start finding ways of encouraging that skill to come forward, even when we are not faced by adversity. Finally, one of the biggest things we have is we have a painful past. We have a very painful history that we share together. And when people share a painful history together, they also share a common purpose of wanting change and of wanting to see a better life. There is a lot of energy in people to want to see a better Zimbabwe. And we must leverage on that energy whilst it's still there. It's a small window of opportunity today when everybody wants to see a better Zimbabwe. And we should leverage on that opportunity. Finally, the biggest human capital investment models that we have in the country, which are celebrated across the world, one of them is the apprenticeship program that we have in Zimbabwe, which is supported by government, has always been supported by government. We, as Zimbabwe, are churning artisans, boiler makers, electricians, etc., into sub-Saharan Africa and beyond because of that human capital investment model that we have. And it is something that we need to continue to leverage on as we build the country. The second model we used to have, which maybe we are trying to resuscitate now, is the vocational skills training model. You know, when my father went to school, he told me that at a certain point you would have to decide whether you are going to do agriculture or building or some practical skill, and that becomes it. And my father, when he was growing up, took up agriculture, and then he became a mudumeni or something like that afterwards, and he continued on that track. And this is a model that accepts that not all our children are sharp, and not all our children are gifted to be leaders. Some people have practical skills. They're going to be masons, they're going to be builders, they're going to be carpenters. And we must leverage on that whilst they're still young and build those skills into them. Today, we've been pushing all sorts of people into universities. And one of the biggest cries of HR professionals is the quality of graduates that we are producing. Because we're pushing everybody to go and do a business management degree, which is not realistic and practical. So, ladies and gentlemen, with those few words, thank you very much, and thank you for your time. Good.
Thank you, Precious. And another round of applause. Boy, okay. Last but not least, we've got Gladys Mpemba. She's a principal consultant specializing in labor relations, human resources, and organizational development. Holds a BSc degree in politics and administration, diplomas in personnel management and training management. She has attained several certificates in industrial relations, paralegal training, and training of trainers. She has conducted worker education programs in Malawi, Botswana, Swaziland, Lesotho, and Uganda. She is a government-appointed independent arbitrator. Sits on Girls College, Dominican College boards, and King George VI Board of Governors, and is currently the chairperson of Grain Marketing Board National Employment Council. She has over 30 years experience in dealing with labor matters, 16 years with Ministry of Labor, 16 in private practice. So, ladies and gentlemen, we do have a highly competent individual to talk to us about HR. Please, let's welcome Gladys Mpemba.
Thank you very much. A very good afternoon to you all. I'm here to share the human resource conflict areas in Zimbabwe right now. We all know that with the new dispensation, there are so many conflicts that are happening in the workplaces. And of course, we know that conflict is inevitable. We cannot avoid it. So I'm supposed to talk of 5 main human resource conflict areas, but because of time constraints, I'm going to confine myself to 3. The other thing that I'm supposed to talk about is the gap between expectations and reality. We all know that employees, they've got their own expectations, but practically, the reality on the ground is not allowing certain things to happen. So what I've done is, like I said, there are so many conflict areas that we have, but I'm focusing on 3. One is the legislative provisions in Zimbabwe that are causing conflicts. And I'm going to look at 4. I'm going to look at retrenchments. I'm going to look at short-term working. I'm going to look at fixed-term contracts. If time allows, I'll also look at dispute resolution mechanism in Zimbabwe. The other conflict area that I'm going to look at is to do with salary adjustments, increases. We know what is happening with salaries. And lastly, it will be productivity related salaries. As we know in the Labor Act, there's now a clause that collective bargaining has to be aligned to productivity, but are the employees going to accept that? It's not easy. So I'm going to start talking about the retrenchment. Like I said, legislative provisions that I'm going to relate to. We have the Labor Act, we all know. We also have the Amendment Act, number 5 of 2015, that came up after the Zuma judgment. I think we are all aware when people started to get the 3-month notices, and then there was this legislation to say they have to get packages. So in that Amendment Act, there are provisions to do with retrenchments, the procedures that are there. So we all know that prior to 2015, before amendment number 5 of 2015 came up, employees and employers used to negotiate on packages. But with the advent of number 5 of 2015, there is now a set retrenchment package of 1 month's salary for every 2 years that an employee has worked, if you are going to retrench the employee. Obviously, employees are not happy with it, because prior to that, they would negotiate, they would prolong the process, and they would remain on the payroll. But right now, with the procedures that we have, the employer just retrenches. There used to be challenges on the justification for the retrenchment. We no longer see that. Selection criteria, why have you selected employee A, not employee B? We don't find that in the legislation. It's causing a lot of conflict in the workplaces. The package again, the employees are feeling that they've been exposed because they cannot ask for more than the 1 month for every 2 years that an employee has worked. We know also that because of that exposure, employees are then getting into disputes with the employers. Disputes that will then prolong the whole process again, and they remain on the payroll. So it becomes very, very difficult. Employees are therefore then expecting government to come up with legislation that would cushion them. We know that there is an amendment to the Amendment Act that is in place. And there are certain things that Labor has come up with where they are saying we feel this is not right. If an employer is allowed just to pay the 2 weeks and we know they are able to pay more than that, they have the capacity, where do we go to? Those that are aware of Section 3 of Section 12C, subsection 3 of Section 12C of the Amendment Act, it says where an employer has no capacity to pay the package, the retrenchment package in one go, they can actually apply to their employment council or to the works council or to the retrenchment board to stagger the payment. But there's no way where it is stated that employees can actually challenge that. Therefore, the provisions of our legislation, they're actually causing conflicts in the workplace. Like I said, there are lots of gray areas. You find that in the same Amendment Act, talking of legislation that is causing the conflict, we have a section that says a dismissed employee, that is how it has been put. An employee that has been dismissed is supposed to get a package. And obviously, employers are saying, how can I pay a package to an employee? How can I reward someone that has already done wrong? So it's calling for a change in legislation. Because obviously, if we want to open Zimbabwe for business, no investor would want to come when we have such legislation. So there's need to quickly revise our labor laws so that we can give an opportunity for growth in business. The employees and the trade unions, obviously, they would be happy to say the law says we should be paid. I have to be paid even if I've been dismissed. But it does not make business sense that someone is stolen from you, you then pay them a package. So we need to revamp or amend again our labor laws, and the sooner it's done, then it runs parallel with the new dispensation that everything gets changed, the labor laws, to allow for good business. I also want to briefly talk about short-time working, where if a business is not doing well and they want to implement measures to avoid retrenching employees, they have to look at ways, maybe work short hours, but until they are in agreement with the employees, they cannot implement that. So where there's no production, like Precious was saying, employees will still want to, they'll still want to be paid. We have a culture, unfortunately, in Zimbabwe, where we are paid to report for duty. People just know 8 o'clock, I'm in the office, I knock off at 5, I still get paid. And that is causing conflicts because business is suffering, but employees, because of that culture, we have inherited it, we have worked with it for years, and therefore it then causes conflict in the workplace between business and labor, or between the employer and the employees. Again, the process on short-time working, which is in the Labor Act, is quite cumbersome. It's very lengthy. If you don't agree, there are procedures that you have to follow through, and you send to your NEC, at times they don't get back to you in time, even though time frames are stated in the Labor Act. Not all authorities adhere to those time frames. And in the meanwhile, businesses are suffering. So at the end of the day, there's conflict. The employer is trying to persuade the employees, can you understand that what you are doing, we are killing the business? The employees, on the other hand, are also saying, because I'm present, I need to be paid for the day that I've come to work. I have no problems with challenges that you are facing as an employer. So we don't have those good relations in most of the companies here in Zimbabwe. Talking of the dispute resolution mechanism, we all know that cases now, if you have got a dispute, they go to the labor office or they go to the designated agent of the respective employment council. That same labor officer or designated agent is supposed to conciliate, supposed to give a draft ruling. Then it goes to the labor court. So we are finding this same person who is adjudicating is both the prosecutor, is also the judge, and obviously, this is causing conflict. At the end of the day, when cases land up in the labor court, it's not all parties that would know the procedures that are required in terms of the labor court rules. And again, we find that there are now new labor court rules that came out in December through Statutory Instrument 150 of 2017. And any lay person would not understand what is supposed to happen. They are too technical for litigants who cannot, even though they are even business or employees, they cannot afford the legal fees to hire for any assistance. Talking of fixed-term contracts, we all know that Amendment number 5 of 2015 has a clause that says all employment councils must have an agreement on how they are going to manage their contracts. There's no supervision. There's still casualization of labor. The ministry or government was supposed to come up with provisions to cushion those that are not covered by NECs, those that are not under the jurisdiction of NECs. But nothing has happened. We're getting close to 3 years from when we had Amendment Act number number 5 of 2015. We are now in 2018, nothing has happened. We still see casualization of labor. So it's creating conflicts in the workplaces, and therefore this needs to be addressed. When we go to dollarization in 2009, as again was said by Precious, we started on very high wages and salaries. There were reviews every year, at times even quarterly. Salaries were getting paid. Right now, we find the trend has changed. For the past 2-3 years, maybe there have not been increases in a number of industries. We now see employers are failing to pay salaries or wages on time. They are cutting wages, they are cutting salaries. And obviously, employees that were used to have so much in their pockets, they are not happy with it. It is therefore, again, causing a lot of conflict. We are also saying, for the employees and the employers, there is need for them to engage. Look at the practical problems that they have in their workplace and see whether they can also apply the productivity-based salaries, which we know not everyone wants. Like I said, we are used to just getting into the office as long as I've been present the whole day, whether I did anything or I did not do anything. So at the end of the day, even though it is in the Labor Act, nothing is happening. Yet it is saying that we must have productivity-related wages when negotiations are taking place. Finally, how then can we resolve these conflicts? The relations between labor and capital, that is between the employer and the employees, they must be harmonized. There has to be a change of attitude. We have to act differently from what we have been doing. We also need to engage each other. There is need for effective communication between the employers and the employees, or between the trade unions and the employer associations. There's also a lot of mistrust. Therefore, transparency, we have to try and work towards transparency, trying to put things on the table and try to convince the other party if we are having a problem. Lastly, we have to have amendments to our legislation. If we are going to allow for business to grow, if we are going to be seeing Zimbabwe is open for business, we have to look at our laws and say, do our labor laws allow for growth of business? Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I will not attempt to summarize what our 3 experts have said. Suffice it to say that employee engagement is vital. Zimbabwean wages are high, and there are HR conflict areas. I would like to allow for 3 questions to our panelists, seeing that our time. Are there any 3 burning questions? Mr. Makaya, yes. Mr. Makaya, then Mr. Hove, then the gentleman at the back.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. CEO. Thanks, Mr. Kunaka. A quick question here, directed mainly, in fact, this is a question to the 3 panelists, particularly Victor and Precious, because they touched on skills. There's an argument that following the meltdown, there was a skills flight where those who were skilled left the country. And only those who were not very skilled remained. And those were there in 2009. Are we saying those who remained, like us, we are deadwood? I'm not sure here, because the issue of skills, yes, you said, Victor, if you combine talent and skills, then we will achieve excellence. And people said those who had the skills left the country. That's why you see potholes, because only those who remained. Is this what you were saying? It's now very, very complex to me. If you could address that point. Thank you.
I do not recall talking about skills flight. I just spoke about acquisition of skills. Sorry, I spoke about identification of talent and building on that in order to achieve a higher level of competence, as opposed to where you go and skill someone in an area in which they are not talented, and therefore they will achieve less. That's the point I made. I never spoke about skills flight.
So I spoke about skills flight. So I think what is important is for us to understand that the skills flight we had in 2005 to 2009 was significant. We're talking about close to 4 million Zimbabweans living outside the country. And I think that makes up for around what percentage of the population? About 25%. It's significant. So it doesn't mean that the skills that remained are dead wood, but it just says that we had a significant loss of skills, right? And 25% loss is huge. The economy will feel it. The country will feel it somewhere. Because we are developing nurses for the future. We were developing doctors for the future. We were developing engineers for the future. And we woke up and they were all gone. We still had some, yes, that stayed, but they were not enough to cover the gap of that 25% that left. This is why today you have chaos in hospitals, and because maybe you have only one specialist who can work on a specific area, and the rest of them are outside the country. And no matter how good the guy is, he will never be able to compensate for that skills loss of that many people who are supposed to be here. So I think that's the point that I was trying to make. But definitely, the people that remained are not dead wood. I mean, I'm part of that dead wood. They are not dead wood, but it's just that we lost a significant number of the people we had there.
Thank you, Victor.
Sorry, can I just make one more point? I have 2 more points. I think it's important to say there remains a significant measure of skills flight in this country as we speak now. People are still leaving the country, yeah? And the second thing is, the skills that left mainly were skills that were in demand elsewhere. So if your skill wasn't in short supply elsewhere, you probably found yourself staying behind. But I would also say, for you to have been able to manage in the economy that we've been through and which we continue to go through, you must be having significant skills levels. Absolutely.
Okay, if we can have the 2 last questions together before we hand over to the panelists.
My name is Bina Oswald, Mr. Gunaka. From the CEO Africa Roundtable, and allow me before I pose my question to congratulate the Institute on the 100 years. And as the Roundtable, we celebrate with you. We're excited about that. I have a small question to Madame Nika. The question posed by the President, he talked about dead wood. And in line with IOM statistics, professionals that were developed between 2000 and 2010, I think 70%, especially in artisans and other related fields, went out, and it's true. But we have renewed ourselves and we've trained more. Are you saying the quality is less? Are you saying we did not come up with adequate numbers? My second question is that for labor and labor relations in our companies, in the next 10 to 15 years, do you think we are still going to be basing our models on 8 to 5 jobs? Or are we merely going to look at skills? As long as you are connected and you've got the necessary tools, you can be able to multi-skill and service a bigger audience rather than being stuck in an office between 8 to 5. What is your comment? Thank you.
Okay. So on the first question, around what we have done to replenish the skills that we lost, I actually made a comment about that earlier to say we've done a lot of work. So what we now have is a huge skills base but with less experience. So the average experience back then of an engineer, for example, was between 10 to 15 years. The average experience of the engineers we have in business today is between 5 to 10 years. So you have the skills now, but they have less experience. So when you're working with people that are less experienced, you need a different approach in terms of coaching, mentoring, and accelerating their growth because they haven't seen much. So they need that support in order to give you value and the value that you need. Definitely we have skills. What we now have is a skills to experience gap. And that's what we need to work on. That's the first thing. Second thing, you spoke about the model of the future and how it is going to evolve. Today, the model is actually evolving. It's actually organizations that are refusing to accept it. Most of our employees are now 10% entrepreneurs. It's like that. They work for us, but they have businesses that they run elsewhere. They have companies, they have farms, they have all sorts of, most of our employees are now 10% entrepreneurs. And we are the ones who are behind because we don't have models that support that. So the model has already started to change. And we need to catch up in terms of now coming up with policies that support that. Because people will use your phones, they will use your time, and they will use your resources to do all of that. But definitely, with millennials that we have in the workforce today, they don't want to be stuck with one employer. They want to be able to serve 5 companies, give the skill to Delta, a skill to Unilever, a skill to Colgate, and go without being tied down to one person. So definitely that model is on its way and it's actually creeping into business now. Thank you.
Thank you. Wove is my name, I come again, but this time very short and brief. To my friend Victor, managers born or trained. I'm saying this in view of the diagram or picture which you showed us of a skillful young man or old man dancing. My second question is directed to Precious. You talk extensively about cost of labor being a problem. What can be done to correct this thing in view of the powerful trade unions which will not accept reduction of wages? Also, in view of our Labor Act, which is very rigid when it comes to such issues. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wove. It is my belief that, and this was really the gist of the point I was trying to make so far as talent identification is concerned. There are people who have natural talent in the area of management. It comes to them naturally. You'll find a man running a successful business and managing it very well without much education. They have talent in that area. And the point I was making was, you can still get the skills and be able to do a job, but you will not be able to excel as much as one whose skills are built on that talent would. So that essentially was my point. I believe there is all people have talent in different areas. We need to identify those areas of talent and build their careers and occupations on that talent. Then they will excel. As opposed to me trying to be a doctor today, I will struggle. But maybe I could be able to dispense Panadol and what have you.
Thank you for the question. So again, I had touched a bit on what we can do and what we should do to reduce the cost of labor in the country. And one of the biggest things is around the productivity-based pay model, which I mentioned earlier. And I think the Labor Act already supports that. It's already written in the Labor Act. There's a productivity center that has already been formulated by the Ministry of Labor, and they are working on productivity models that they want to put in place to support productivity-based pay. How it will be taken is a journey. You know, it's a whole thing around changing the mindset of people who believed that they deserved a salary while they were sitting and not producing anything. It's a culture change journey, and it doesn't happen overnight. But we have to start, and we have to start somewhere. You also mentioned the fact of our unions being maybe resistant. And when I look at our unions, I want to look at our unions in comparison to unions of other countries and not look at them in isolation. I think that Zimbabwean unions are progressive. They are progressive even in the nature of the conversations they have with employers around wages and their patience. I mean, the number of strikes you have in this country is negligible. You cannot compare it to South Africa and all these other countries. And so it shows you that these are people that you can have a nice dialogue with and actually get something out of them. It's a journey, though, that conversation. And it's a whole mindset change. I never thought we would see the day when we would have a minimum retrenchment package in this country. But through dialogue, we achieved that. And I think through dialogue, we can achieve productivity-based wages in order to reduce the wage structure of this country. But like I said also, the unions will never accept that reduction if industry is also not willing to come down on the cost of goods and services. So I'm not sure which one should start. It's a chicken and egg situation. Should the prices come down first or the labor costs come down first and then the other happens? But it must happen simultaneously because the wages must come in line with the cost of living, for sure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have not heard a question from the ladies. Is there a lady who would like to ask a question? Yes. I'm a strong supporter of We Can, and I would want to give them a chance. And after that, I'll give Gladys time to comment on any of the questions as well.
Okay, the question that I had was directed to Gladys, and it was just to say, what can we do to increase employer-employee engagement? Because it seems most of these conflicts arise from that. Is there a way we can sort of align strategies as employers and employees and the government as well to avoid some of these conflicts? And then I also have a comment that I was planning to make in answer to one of the questions that was asked by one of the guys from the back about the brain drain. So the brain drain is not just a lack of skills or a shift of skills from one country to the other. It's also a loss on that investment financially, which is what then we feel as an economy. So the reason why Zimbabwe is feeling the impact of that brain drain that Precious mentioned is because we invested in the people we trained, and those people are not there anymore, and they keep leaving. So that money we're investing in those people is why, as an economy, we keep feeling the pinch, even though we still have a large labor force. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Talking about engagement of employers and employees, I think we all know that there are authorities. In the workplace, we've got the Works Council. At industry level, we've got the Employment Council. And then we also have when the federations meet at national level. So the main problem is that talk of the workplace situation. There is a problem with employers in particular not wanting to recognize or respect the workers' committees when they are put in place, when they're elected into office. There's that tendency to look down upon them, saying what is it that they would know when we talk the language of business, would they know? So the engagement is to start from there, from the lowest level. They have to learn to talk to each other. Obviously, we've come a long way. Workers' committees in the 1980s, 85, when we had our first labor act, we know that we had lots of strikes, and then we had the promulgation of the workers' committee regulations, and the employees that were elected into office to become workers' committees, they were not exposed to training. So right now you find that a lot of companies are investing in training for the workers' committees, and obviously communication is a key factor. And again, the other thing that I note is at industry level, a lot of employers do not participate. They leave it to a few and only cry foul when agreements have been reached. So it will take time, but the issue of trust is what would then lead to the engagement and the communication. I wanted to comment briefly on what my colleagues have also said, talking of multi-skilling, that yes, organizational development now calls for the new model. It's now calls for multi-skilling. You need to be knowing to do a lot of things. You can't just come and then say, I'm going to be answering the phone, you're not computer literate. So all those things people need to move. There has to be a drive towards multi-skilling. So I support that multi-skilling has to be there. It has been said, what do we do to reduce wages and so on? We know the productivity-related wages is something that labor is not going to quickly embrace. But they have to understand that we have to change, and change takes time. So it's going to take a bit of time, but I think that will be the way to go. But what is making it problem is the culture also that we've had in our different companies, where you find that we don't have performance management systems in place. We just pay bonuses, we just give increases. We don't look at, does the employee, what is it that the employee is investing in this company? So that is another thing that we have to look at, maybe start with performance management systems so that we then drive towards productivity. And then lastly, on the rigidity of the Labour Act, I think we all know that the Labour Act is full of flaws, and a lot of people say that it is worker favorable, 75% favorable, and already there are complaints about what's coming up in the new amendment to the amendment number 5. For instance, we all know that maternity leave is currently restricted to 3 maternity leave with 1 employer, but it's now going to be indefinite. It can be any number of kids with 1 employer. So the issue is, who is now going to pay for, in excess of the 3 maternity leave if an employee decides to exercise their natural right to bear children. So the Labour Act, yes, the engagement has to happen again. And like Precious has said, we did not think that, even though they are not happy, but we did not think that Labour would agree to a minimum package of 2 weeks for every year worked. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can we give another round of applause to my panel? Thank you. They've acquitted themselves well. And I think yourselves, for your patience.